Hello. So I'm not in my usual location, so that's the reason that you're at kind of a bit of a weirder angle than usual. But I hope it doesn't bother you too much. I've had quite a few people ask on the Vital video that I did, the like 2-hour long one where I explained everything. A lot of people wanted more information on the mod remap functions in Vital, how they can be used usefully, I suppose, and just different stuff that you can do with them. I'm not going to go too crazy. Like, you can use these to set up, you know, FM modulations to oscillators and stuff like that. I have looked at that in another video. There's an FM tips on my channel for Vital. I'll link that here. But what I'm going to go over more is using it to set up presets and using it to turn one LFO into multiple LFOs, which has numerous advantages, and yeah, just stuff like that. So I'm going to show you a couple of sounds from a recent preset pack that I did that kind of show a couple of the more useful ways that I've found for these mod mappers, and then we'll have a look at something more simple from scratch that we can build, just to give you a couple of ideas. So yeah, the first one I've got here is this pluck bass, and this is using this idea of turning the mod mappers into almost a way of separating up presets. So this transform button here is mapped to a few things, like through a step sequencer, and it's got like 5 different modes. So there's like 5 different pluck modes here. And then once you've got your mode selected, your pluck that you like, you can, you know, come through here and add some of the other effects. Let's change the mode again. And that's all using the mod mappers. So this is a very simple example where basically how this works is, as I move through the macro here, I've got the macro set up to various different parameters that I've got set up on these 5 spaces here. So I've split this into 5, so you can see up here that there's 5 divisions. And then basically as I run through this macro, we're going to be here, then we're going to be here, and we're going to be here, and then we're going to be here, and then we're going to be here, and those are set to different values. So if we say go to option 1 here, so we're in the first phase here. If I change this value, let's just turn on the step editor here. We can change up that setting, and then let's switch to the second one here. Not really paying much heed to whether it sounds good or not, but so we can change up these settings. Then let's go to one of the other things I've got set up. So I've got this also this distortion amount set up. Is that making a big difference? Probably just go for something more obvious. Oh yeah, let's go back to the first setting here. So got like the pitch relationship between the FM modulators. So let's pick that one for the first one. So now you can hear I've got 5 sort of distinct sounds that I've set up here just by mapping basically 5 different steps to different parameters and then modulating through them with the macro. And then I can kind of choose the one I prefer. So let's say we like that one the most, and then, you know, edit it and go through. So it's a great way of having sounds that are kind of related to each other that you want sort of different flavors of in the same preset. Really good for plucks and stuff like that. I'll show you that in more detail in a second, that kind of idea. And the second thing I wanted to show you here was just this concept of a riser. So this is what I'm doing here basically is, obviously you can see I'm modulating the pitch, and I'm modulating that by a few different sources, but this preset is I suppose, sort of complex to just dive straight into and go into exactly what I'm modulating where. So let's just have a look at a simplified version of this so I can show you sort of the idea that I'm using here. So this is a similar concept where it's like a riser kind of a sound. And then once I pass a certain part in this macro, we're going to move to a sort of different timing. And then as I get to the end of the macro, we have a different one. So the way that this works is this is also an example of using one LFO to get multiple different modulations. So as you can see, I've got LFO here mapped to the oscillator 1 transposition. So that's as if I just dragged and dropped on here and I set the modulation amount. But the thing is, in Vital you can map an LFO to the same parameter over and over again. So I've got LFO1 mapped again to transpose and mapped again to transpose. But in here in the mod mapper, what I've got is this first shape here is this sort of half ramp down. So let's turn that on so you can hear it. So it's ding ding, okay. And then if we move to the second phase of the modulation here, which as you can see, as I change the macro here, the first one is activated. As I change the macro, the second one becomes activated. I'll show you how to do that in a second. So the second one here is half the speed, or double the speed. And this is coming from the same LFO. And then as you can see on the last one here, once I get towards the end of this macro, it's activating this third one. Again, same LFO, but we've got a different sort of idea here. So instead of just being those straight eighth notes, we've got some 16ths thrown in there as well. And the modulation amount is actually different too, which we can change if we want as well. I'll show you how to do that in a second. So basically what we're doing here is we're running through 3 different sort of shapes for the LFO. So how are we able to do this? Basically what the LFO is doing when LFO1 is set to something is it's just going to run through this mod remap. So if I were to set LFO to macro 2 here and we come down and have a look at that modulation, it's the same shape. So as you can see, it's just this LFO is a ramp straight up here, and then it's coming into this mod remapper, and this is basically telling it what to do. So what should I do? Should I just play that shape straight or should I alter it? So let's say we had a triangle here. What we'd be doing is we'd be sending a triangle shape. So you can see the movement over here to macro 2. It's running through that triangle shape straight. But as we edit stuff in the mod mapper, we're essentially warping the LFO shape that goes through. And the way that that works functionally is when this is set to a ramp, you've basically got half a bar where it's just going to run straight through this shape. So this is half a bar of just running through this shape, and then any additions that I make here are going to be what it plays. So the easiest way is to show you that. So if I say draw in some sine waves here or something, let's just go with triangles. So let's go with quarter note triangles. So now what it's going to do is it's going to, let's change this to a bar as well. So over the bar, every quarter it's going to play this triangle shape, because remember the LFO is just moving through here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's just see that. So that's all it's doing, is it's just reshaping the LFO that's coming through. Now, as it gets more complex, as the LFO shape gets more complex, it's going to be a bit more confusing to work out exactly how it's going to sound. So because you can do that, basically what you can do is you can take this LFO as the time setting. So in this case, it's a bar. And then you can come in and modulate different stuff with that, and then go into the individual mod remaps and actually draw your LFO shape in there. So the first advantage to that is you get multiple LFOs for the price of one LFO. So you're only using LFO 1, but you might be able to modulate the same thing by a bunch of different shapes, or different things by a bunch of different shapes. The other advantage is now I've got one LFO that controls the time setting for all of my modulations. So let's just for instance, let's run this LFO2 to this macro. So you can see that that's just running up through the thing. But now this LFO2 here controls how quickly those shapes are going to happen that are controlling the pitch. So you can hear that as I change it. Instead of this now being half notes, it's going to change to being quarter notes if I just double the speed of the LFO. And of course, all of these double in speed too, because they're attached to the same LFO. They're just a reshaping of that LFO. And then if I double the speed again, we're going to get an even more intense effect. And the same thing if we keep going up. So then we have sort of the power of macros. Is this makes your macros even more powerful. So first of all, I'm using this macro to mess with these LFOs, and the way I'm doing that, if I come down here, so I'm sort of switching between these in the exact same way that I was showing you how to switch between sort of the different sounds in that pluck sound. The way I'm doing it is I've selected the steps here so that I can draw steps, and then let's cut this into 8. Okay, so now just to make it easy to understand, if I set this LFO1 to 1 bar, now we've got 1 bar that's going through this mod remap, and it's going through, and that's been divided up into 8 parts. So you can almost think of it as this LFO is running through in eighths. Okay, so it's going to go 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8, start again, and it's just going to run through that shape over and over again. So how have I actually changed the time in between these? So it's very simple. What I've got is I've got this macro here. I've got it mapped to the LFO amount, okay? And what I'm saying here basically is macro 1 is going to the modulation amount 1, which is my first shape that I've drawn up here with this sort of slowest one. And then I'm saying that I want that to be active for the first half of the macro. Then it's going to switch over. And then for the second one here, instead of being active for that first part of the macro, I'm saying I want this to be active for the second part of the macro, except this very last 1/8 here, okay, this very last 1/8 of the grid. So that's going to come in, and then it's going to disappear, and then we're going to move on to this third shape here, the fastest one, and then again I've got macro 1, and that's going to the modulation 3 amount, which is here, and that's only coming on for that very last 1/8. So say you wanted to do something in a certain timing, where you say wanted to have a bunch of different shapes trigger on 16ths. How would you do that? Well, you would have this same idea where you've got your macro set up to your different modulation types, and then let's just slice these up into 16ths, okay? So if I hit 16, that's going to divide this up into 16 parts, and then if I modulate this over the course of a bar, either you can automate it in your DAW up straight as over the course of a bar, or you can use an LFO that's straight, that's 1 bar long. Then all of a sudden you've got control where you can change the modulation every 16th note. So it's great for making things like risers. If you want to change up, like if you've got like a bass, I guess like a dubstep wobble type of thing, and you want to change between different I guess rhythms and stuff like that, you can do that using this method. So then I've got this macro that's running straight, that's controlling these different shapes that I'm getting from 1 LFO, and then I'm using that macro to do other stuff, like for instance it's controlling the dry wet on the reverb over here, and it's just doing that straight as a normal macro would. So as I move the knob, the reverb is going up. And then I've got a filter cutoff here, that's doing the same thing. As I move the knob, the reverb's coming up, so I haven't messed with this at all. Then I've got my oscillator transposition mapped again to LFO2 here, and instead of just going straight up, I've slightly curved it, so you can hear I'm getting an exponential pitch increase. Or I could do the opposite, or I could mess with the pitch over time sort of weirdly. So let's go with like a triangle or something here. Let's pull that modulation down so it's a bit more subtle. So you can have things sort of layering over each other in a really cool way, because you've got so much control with the remapping and the different shapes that you can get out of every modulation that you do. So let's look at sort of how I did that first sound where I had, you know, I guess different plucks on every sound. So let's set up a basic FM relationship here. So I've just got a sine wave here. Let's turn that into a sort of a bass sound. And then let's bring in FM from the second oscillator here. Let's turn that down so we can't hear it. We're going to use another wave shape. Let's use one of my wavetables. Okay, so now let's make a pluck out of this. Let's just use this LFO1 here. And let's just attach that to the FM amount. The FM amount here. And now, instead of messing with this LFO to get our pluck shape, let's maybe mess around with the remap in here. And make the, I suppose, the modulation a bit tighter. So now we've got a really plucky sound. So now let's say like we want a different timbre on each of these. Let's put our macro, and let's mess with some, let's first of all mess with the wavetable with this macro. And let's mess with some sort of a warp mode, maybe vocode. Vocode's probably good to do. Let's do that as well. And perhaps we'll also mess with the pitch relationship between the two oscillators. Okay, great. So we've got 3 parameters here now that we can control with this macro and set up kind of a cool preset with it. So let's just, for the purposes of simplicity, let's set up our macro to have 3 divisions, so we can have 3 different settings within our macro. So how will we do that? Well, we just divide into 3 here, and now our macro is going to be divided into 3 sections. And for now, let's take our step painting tool here, and let's just make everything 0 so that the macro isn't affecting anything the whole way through. So now as I move it up, there's going to be no difference. So let's focus on this first third and let's try and get a sound that we like. Let's turn off left and right there. So first of all, let's focus on the waveform, see which one sounds best to us. It doesn't really matter which one sounds best, but okay, let's go with that. And then let's find sort of a spectral morph setting we like. That's fine, let's go with that. Great. So last, let's go to our transposition here and let's find sort of a frequency that's kind of off so that it sounds a bit grittier. Great, so that sounds good. Or maybe it doesn't, who cares really, it doesn't matter. So that's our first third. So let's go back to default on our second third of our macro and let's start with transpose this time. Let's go with a high pitch sound there. And let's morph. Great, so now we've got that sound on our second setting, so here's our first. And let's go to our third sound. Let's mess around with the, let's just leave the wavetable where it is on the second one. Let's go to this waveframe. Oh, I've stereoed that, my bad. Let's just hit that spectral morph there, and then we'll do a really high pitch difference. I'll just quickly so we can edit it here too, as well as, you know, editing it in our, let's pull that pitch down because it's kind of insane. And let's also just pull the FM amount down. So this isn't the best sound, but you get the idea. So let's actually switch up the wavetable. So let's say we're happy with our sound here. So now we've got 3 distinct sounds in our macro. We've got this first one. And you can extrapolate that as much as you want. So let's say that you wanted different, for instance, distortion settings for each one. We could add that in too. So let's add our drive in, and let's even attach it to, let's actually add a filter in here as well. Let's go for a pre-filter, and let's add that in. Let's mess with the resonance here and the cutoff. So right now it's straight. Let's get 3 good settings for that. So let's do our distortion filter cutoff. So let's just set everything to 0 again, the same way we did before. And let's find a good drive setting on our first setting here. Great. Let's just second setting here. And our third setting, well, let's mess about with that filter cutoff. So let's start with a third setting. That's great. Second setting and the first one. And the same thing here again. Let's find that third setting. Okay, so not the best sound on the planet, but you get the idea. So you can turn your macros into this, I suppose, crazy powerful thing that you can set up. And of course, I'm doing it straight here where it's got 3 distinct settings. You can obviously come in here and, you know, you could have, say, the first one be straight, and then maybe you want like a slower morph in the middle setting. Let's pick something more obvious, like let's go with the transpose, because that's probably the most obvious to hear. So maybe you want a smooth transposition between the middle setting and the third setting. And then you want to go back to it being flat on the transposition again. Or let's say we want the distortion drive to, instead of, you know, doing this whole 3 thing, let's just set this to 1. And let's just make the distortion drive, let's go for a step down here. Let's make the distortion drive just decrease over time. So now that's straight, and I've also hit left right again. I keep doing that. So now as I go up, our distortion is just going to smoothly come down. So you can apply different rules to everything. You can apply different rules to different things that you're modulating with the same macro. They could be set up to change at different times in the macro, and that exact same thing, it's easiest to see it on LFO or on the macro, but the LFO is doing the exact same thing. You can think of an LFO. So let's just take our second LFO. You can really think of an LFO as just a macro that's doing this. So it's just going straight up like this, but it's acting as a macro that you can edit the exact same way. So instead of breaking something into thirds and having it be 3 different settings, you could break it into 8 sections. You could set your LFO here to be a bar long. So a bar long, and then you could set this to be an eighths, right? And then you've got eighths here. So you could have this be doing this in eighths, and then you can do that technique I showed you earlier where maybe the next one will be in sixteenths and stuff like that. So I tried to make that as understandable as possible. I hope that has helped you understand some of the things that you can do with the mod remap, because I know some people are really confused at how you actually apply that usefully, and it's actually, in my opinion, the killer feature that Vital has that pretty much nothing else has, is this ability to do pretty much anything you want with modulation sources. So you've got 8 LFOs in here, but you essentially have LFOs until you run out of modulation slots. So yeah, hopefully that has been helpful to you or given you some ideas. I have a free preset pack for Vital that you can pick up if you want. And a big, huge thank you to the people who support me on Patreon and support me here on YouTube, who help me to bring these videos to you by giving me money, and then I give them cool things in return. So a big thank you to those people. I'll be putting all their names up on screen. so thankful for everybody who's supported me. It's only been up a week and I've already got quite a few people on there, so thanks very much. And let me know what you want to see next. Okay, bye. Thanks very much.